Recently reaching 16 years of age, Team Fortress 2 is one of the oldest actively supported video games on the market. Despite being old enough to legally drive, players still come out in droves to play TF2 every day, frequently placing it in the top 10 most played games on Steam. Fans often cite this placement as evidence of the game's continued growth and popularity, which is an exceptional feat in face of its age. Thanks to this, especially to someone unfamiliar with TF2, everything seems fine. On the surface, this relic of a game still receives updates, has active developer support, and has tens of thousands of players every single day. Really seems like this game is destined to live forever. Yeah, I don't buy that. Nope. Look at the number of players reported by Steam. Intuitively, if you tally up every player inside of game servers, that figure should be pretty close to what's reported by Steam. Well alright, that's a massive discrepancy. You know what? Ignore that. Queue for a game. You'll often find that the game coordinator struggles to fill up an entire server, even on popular maps during peak hours, despite tens of thousands of people apparently playing the game. And more often than not, these servers are filled by cheating bots. This doesn't add up. Where are all the players? For years, players, myself included, have taken TF2's player count at face value as true, but this number is not real. Team Fortress 2 faces abhorrent neglect, which has left it wide open for abuse and exploitation, the magnitude of which very few people understand. Until now. Bots, or non-human activity, have been a part of Team Fortress 2's ecosystem for many years. Bots come in various forms, but most of them fall into three basic categories. We have cheaters, traders, and idlers. The type of bot that I'm sure most of you are unfortunately familiar with are cheaters. These are non-human accounts that are set up to, well, cheat. They've plagued Valve's official game servers for many years now, making the game unplayable more often than not. Yet despite their annoying presence, there's not that many of them. Bots that actually play the game require a lot of resources, like computer memory. Ergo, a single person can't host that many cheater bots without some serious investment. Most bot hosters operate less than 100 at an individual level, typically on their own hardware or by using free trials of cloud services, like Amazon, for example. If these self-reported figures are to be trusted, the total number of cheater bots in TF2 likely numbers around 1,000 at any given time. Likely slightly less than that. Of course, this figure does vary throughout the year, because bot hosters tend to fire up more bots specifically to disrupt new updates. The second type of bot that I'm sure many of you are also familiar with are traders. These are automated accounts that handle trade requests for third-party sites, or buy, sell, and trade items for individual players that lease them. I'll go ahead and lump gambling site bots into this group as well, but they're definitely a minority. Trading bots aren't required to be in-game to trade, but quite a few of them idle in-game for various reasons. Aesthetic purposes, for example. Perhaps this entices someone to trade with a bot more often? I'm not entirely sure. Unsurprisingly, the total number of trading bots outnumbers cheater bots, reaching well into the thousands. Where there's money to be made, people will come. Trading bots don't play the game, they simply move items around, requiring far fewer resources than cheater bots to operate, so we should expect more of these out in the wild. However, only a fraction of trading bots have the game running, likely around 300 to 500 or so. Bots from larger trading websites don't idle, typically only those operated by individual players or rental services. And that brings us to our final type of bot, the one the least of you are familiar with. Idlers. These are accounts that are set up to collect TF2's timed item drops, which can then be sold for a profit. In the past, Valve didn't take kindly to this and took action against idlers. They limited how many items are dropped per week and made it so players had to be inside of game servers in order to receive them. These were decent stopgaps, but not the best deterrents in the long run, because idlers still operate to this day. Given the fact that TF2 and Steam are both free, it's very easy to exploit the item drop system. In total, the number of idle bots reaches into the tens of thousands. Yes, you heard me right, tens of thousands. And if you lump all types of bots together, a vast majority of them have the game running. This means that they contribute towards the total player count as reported by Steam. This artificially inflates the player numbers, making Team Fortress 2 look far more populated than it really is. Team Fortress 2 doesn't really have 60 to 100,000 players throughout the year. In fact, it's far, far less. And I'll prove it to you. Starting at square one, if you want to see botting activity, you need high-resolution player data. The unfortunate thing about Steam, and therefore websites like SteamDB, is that they don't preserve high-resolution historic player counts. Player counts are sampled every 10 minutes, which is perfect, but over time, Steam gets rid of data in order to save space. The data get gradually averaged to hourly and then daily, and so on and so forth, which removes a lot of information. So, I had to make a record myself, with a lot of help of course. Very graciously, Mega Scatterbomb volunteered his time and set up a bot for me that collects TF2's player counts directly from Steam's API. We've been sampling TF2's player count every 10 minutes since mid-December of last year, and that's the data that I'll be using for my analysis. I should note now that Steam reports an instant snapshot of players in-game, not some weird average value over time, which is a common misconception. The number you see is the actual number of players in-game. Well, or so I've long since thought. So, to kick things off, I can sail this ship most of the way home with some very basic observations. It doesn't take rocket science to prove that TF2 is heavily botted, just a pair of eyeballs and some common sense. Right now, everyone watching this video, what I want you to do, go to SteamDB and pick any game on Steam, and what you're going to see are player counts that look like this. Here's some player data from Rust, Apex Legends, and Counter-Strike. What you're going to notice are very clear, cyclic player peaks and lows. These cycles happen on a daily basis, separated by about 24 hours. Intuitively, player counts fluctuate like this because of a natural human need: sleep. Most humans sleep. Most people turn off their games and their computers before they go to bed. Of course, there exists a non-zero number of humans that leave their games running all the time or at odd hours, but they definitely represent a negligible minority. This is the dominant expected behavior inside of player data. One should expect normal human activity. And bots? They don't need sleep. They run all the time, or with behavior that doesn't reflect human activity. So if a game's player data doesn't fluctuate like this, something is amiss, or the game is truly dead. One could even consider these daily cycles like a video game's heartbeat. Its pulse. The stronger the rise and fall, the stronger the heart. Therefore, daily player fluctuations are a far better indicator of real human activity in a video game, rather than the peak player count on any given day. Now, with that basic, but very important observation established, let's look at TF2's player data. Do we see human behavior here? The short answer is no, not really. I'll start by showing the entire data record since mid-December. This is pretty hard to read and a lot to digest, so let's zoom in to pretty much any given week, like the other games. From a qualitative standpoint, it looks like TF2 has very little human activity. Its daily cycles are very flat compared to other video games, while player counts remain consistently high. The data are also very noisy, It's riddled with random spikes and drops, ranging from a few thousand to oftentimes tens of thousands of players. They're very rapid as well, occurring over the course of a couple of hours or less. Compared with other video games, TF2 has a comparatively weak and arrhythmic heartbeat. The entire player record looks like this. Zooming into any other week's worth of data shows the exact same behavior. What's going on here? Well, you know, given the focus of this video, your mind may go to bots, and it is bots. But my job in this video is to play devil's advocate. So, to play the role of devil's advocate, I have a little friend here. Say hello to my she-devil. Well, that wasn't very nice. Anyways, let's address the first observation. What would cause flattened player cycles? Well, I'm sure this came into some people's minds. Wouldn't flat player cycles be caused by a bunch of accounts that never go offline? Well, yes, you're correct. For example, let's say you have a game where 10,000 humans log on and off every single day. Here's what that player data would look like. Then, let's add 50,000 accounts that never drop offline. That raises the minimum baseline of online accounts, so player cycles get squished. Now, of course, I could adjust the scaling of my charts to make the cycles look normal again, but note that Steam always plots from 0 to a little bit above the maximum player count, so it's not chart scaling messing with our eyes here. And that's where things get suspicious. My devil's advocate says, this is due to a high volume of players at any given time, thanks to TF2's global popularity. There is indeed this common belief amongst TF2 fans that the game is globally popular, which isn't entirely incorrect. This should translate into more people playing at any given time, because, you know, time zones exist. This would indeed smear out player activity across 24 hours, while keeping player counts consistently high. But this argument is debunked immediately, given that about 80% of player activity is in the Western Hemisphere and in Europe. Given this, we should expect for the vast majority of player activity to occur within a much shorter time frame. In other words, taller peaks and lows, not shorter ones. This isn't me saying that TF2's player count should reach 0 every day, just that the fluctuations should be more pronounced. For example, a globally popular title would be something like Warframe. We have much shorter player cycles, but consistently high player counts. But a regionally popular game would be something like Naraka Blade Point, assuming I pronounced that right. This game is only popular in a very narrow swath of Asia. Therefore, its player cycles are much larger, as nearly all players log on and off at around the same time. TF2 should be somewhere in the middle of these games, but it's not. Well, my little she-devil says, hey, well, you know what? A bunch of humans simply leave their games running all the time. This is an argument that I've seen posed many times before. However, there's no incentive for the common player to do this, other than idling, which hasn't been profitable at the individual level since 2009. There are other niche reasons for leaving TF2 running continuously, but the individual humans that do this almost certainly represent a tiny minority of the player base. So, the argument of a large volume of humans being present all the time isn't plausible. Now, for that second weird behavior, all of the random spikes and dips in the data. Some of these are human, yes. A few sharp dips coincide with server outages as players get knocked offline. But a key feature with outages is that we see a complete recovery back to normal player activity soon after servers come back online. Here's a few games as an example. Normal player counts resume within a short time frame, a few hours, if not faster. And most importantly, these outages are correlated and reflected in other games' data at the same time of reported issues. That's the surefire way of knowing that these dips are outage related and not something else. But what's very strange about outage-related dips in TF2's data is that we oftentimes see an incomplete recovery. Huge chunks of accounts get knocked offline and then never return. January 30th, 2024, an outage knocks players offline. 12,000 accounts that were present before the outages never return. Little she-devil says, you know what, these could just be discouraged players that will come back later. But even many hours later, there is no recovery. This isn't an uncommon occurrence either. This happens almost every time there's a server outage. And sometimes these massive dips happen without server outages. Thousands or tens of thousands of accounts suddenly vanish. Also, outages only address sudden dips in players, not spikes, like this one, where tens of thousands of accounts suddenly come online. We also have very frequent smaller spikes, like these, where a few thousand accounts suddenly appear and then go offline about 30 minutes later, or vice versa. And yeah, sure, game updates account for some large spikes in players, but meaningful updates only happen 3 times a year, inconsequential patches about once a month, if even that. Not every week, not every day. So aside from the few infrequent server outages and updates, what causes all of these spikes and dips? In terms of random spikes and drops, rapid player fluctuations are totally normal. And yes, they are for all video games, but the difference is that they're not random. If I take the hour-by-hour difference in player data, that shows me the gain or loss in players over the past hour. Let's plot that for Counter-Strike, Apex Legends, and Dota, for a few examples. And as you can see, large volumes of players log on or off at around the same time every day. Additionally, they're consistently sized volumes. This behavior is true for all video games, and what you're seeing are those daily cycles again. And this makes sense. People get off at work or come home from school and eventually go to bed at around the same time every day. But for Team Fortress 2, hour-by-hour player fluctuations are entirely random. We see huge volumes of players logging on or off at random times, and absolutely zero consistency in terms of the volumes of players coming and going. These larger spikes can reach into the thousands or tens of thousands of accounts, reflecting 5, 10, 20% or more of the player count at the time. Well, alright, my little she-devil now says, TF2 simply experiences huge chunks of players logging on or off at random times. It records player numbers in some weird way, end of story. I didn't strawman this, by the way. I've seen this argument posed before, and I have no way of directly debunking this. But as I've shown, this is not normal in any video game. How on earth can TF2 be the only exception? Are flattened player cycles human? Are these dips and spikes human? No way, not a chance in hell. This is assuredly bot activity. But do I have proof of this? The short answer, yeah, I do. One of the more convincing pieces of evidence I have is when servers go offline. Let's go back to that example on January 30th. After nearly every server outage, we see that incomplete recovery, where thousands of accounts don't return. But oh hey, look, usually about a day or two later, boop, all of these missing accounts suddenly return all at once. Over the course of about an hour or so, we have thousands of accounts getting turned off and then thousands of accounts getting turned back on, or sometimes vice versa. Here's an example of when there wasn't an outage. January 27th, 2024, 22,000 accounts suddenly go offline. And then, 6 hours later, they all come back online. Another example, January 20th, 2024, 25,000 accounts suddenly come online. 26 hours later, they all drop offline. Then, about a day later, they all come online again, to then all turn off again about 2 days later. What the fuck, man? And here's another example. And another. And another. And another. This weird behavior was the first thing I noticed when I started looking at TF2's player data. And when I saw this, just think about that, right? Tens of thousands of bots running all the time that get knocked offline when servers die, and then their owners turn them back on when they wake up the following day. That's what this looks like to me. But I couldn't just present that as fact and then call it a day. So, I got a second opinion. I spoke with Mega Scatterbomb, someone far more well-versed in botting activity than I am. And after some conversations and showing him the data, it turns out that these are more than likely what are known as botnets, huge networks of bots that seem to be running all the time. Most of these dips happen on a Tuesday, when Steam servers undergo routine maintenance. This logs pretty much everyone's account out of Steam. Humans with their clients open at an individual level quickly log back on, but botnets, they remain offline. Each of the individual bot accounts has to log back in, so it's a lot faster to simply restart the entire network at a set time. It seems like bot hosters have this set up to automatically happen about 24 hours after every Tuesday ends. This is a consistent observation seen across all outages, nearly every single week. But why would someone run thousands or tens of thousands of bots all at once? Is this even possible? The only type of bot that makes sense to operate at this scale are those outside of game servers, since it becomes way too resource intensive to host that many bots playing the game, like I mentioned earlier. So it's not cheaters, and trading sites don't need 10,000 bots. That leaves idlers. They're far less resource intensive, and using cracked versions of the game running in text mode, it's very easy to run a ton of bots on minimal hardware. So it's very much possible. And evidence suggests that there is a shitload of bots. Now listen, I've known for years that bots used to be set up to idle for item drops, but apparently this is still happening, despite it having been over a decade since Valve supposedly made that harder to do. So I did some digging. I reached out to some traders, and eventually came across a guy who specifically deals in hundreds of thousands of item cases. Yes, item cases. And he typically acquired his cases in bulk from one seller. He has a connection that receives up to 2 million cases in 1 year. Now, assuming this to be true, either this guy's connection manages to buy or trade for 225 cases every hour on the hour, 5,480 cases a day for a year straight, which isn't humanly possible on a single Steam account, or he has a network of accounts doing this for him. Given that figure of 2 million cases from one trader, and assuming about 2 case drops per week, which is roughly average per Steam account, that would require 19,231 accounts running year-round, which is similar to the magnitude of the spikes and dips we're seeing in the data. Ah, God. And you know what? That's a lower bound. If you want to speed things up, you're gonna need more accounts, or separate bot networks. And this is just one guy. There's definitely other people operating bot farms at various scales. Now, I'm sure some of y'all are thinking to yourself, why item cases? Why not idle for regular items? Won't those be worth more in the long run because you can craft them into metal? And yeah, your typical item case is cheaper than a piece of refined metal, but it's a lot faster to get 1 case drop than the 18 weapons required for a single piece of refined metal. Cases are a lot easier to acquire because you don't need to log into game servers. Unlike regular items, which drop on a separate timer, cases are dispensed en masse several times a week if you simply have the game running, for free. Valve really wants people to get into the gacha, and if they're reminded a few times a week to do so, well, you know, gambling addicts. We also have botnets that fire up specifically to harvest giftapult drops during the Christmas season, but more on that later. And, as was confirmed by others I spoke with, traditional item farms do still exist, but likely use far smaller botnets. These periodically log into game servers because they're farming normal item drops with the aforementioned restrictions. You remember those smaller spikes in the data? These are likely smaller botnets, a few thousand strong, firing up a few times a week. Some come online for about a half an hour, get their drops, and then all turn off because it's way too resource intensive to run these bots all the time. Just a disclaimer, this is a very, very general overview of how idle farms operate. It's definitely not 100% accurate, I'm lacking a lot of the nuanced details, and I wanted to know more, but extracting detailed information about bot farms proves nearly impossible. Bot hosters are tight-lipped. They don't want these details out in the open because there is inherent competition because guess what? Money is involved. Something else the case trader told me is that he knew people that used to host item farms, himself included, but they don't do so anymore. He also told Mega Scatterbomb that idle farms tend to get banned right before seasonal updates arrive. Or at least they used to be. In fact, these ban waves and the sheer size of the bot farms are corroborated by comments from a Valve employee who told Uncle Dane back in 2017, not sure why people weren't more alarmed by this, that they manually banned hundreds of thousands of bots set up to farm items and craft metal. This was back in 2017, mind you, years after Valve restricted item drops.
In particular, he mentioned the reoccurring problem of of bots that people already use to slowly obtain free metal, and told us about a specific instance very recently where he had to personally ban over 200,000 bot accounts. We were all very impressed by this before he told us that the troublemakers simply just made 200,000 more accounts a few days later. So it kind of puts into perspective how problematic the people who are completely willing to take advantage of the free economy that Team Fortress 2 offers, and how difficult it might be to implement a metal sync system that would prevent that kind of thing from happening.
This confirms that item farming still happens at a massive scale, even back when Valve actively took measures against it, and Lord knows they don't do that now. Nothing is stopping them, meaning the problem has not only been happening for years now, but it's likely the worst it's ever been.
And now for something completely different.
Remember a little while ago when I said almost all video games have player counts that exhibit human behavior? Keyword, almost. Here's Unturned, another popular game, sometimes on par with TF2 in terms of player counts. Here's Unturned's player numbers. Right away, we see similarities with TF2's player data. Very flat player cycles with simultaneously high player counts. A jagged player curve riddled with random, sometimes massive, spikes and drops. All of this is strikingly familiar, isn't it? Lo and behold, it's a well-known fact that Unturned is heavily botted. Players caught wind of this a couple years ago when almost all reported players suddenly went offline, and then didn't come back for a while. No outages, no cause, just gone. They also note a massive discrepancy between the number of players in game servers and the numbers reported by Steam. We'll get back to that later. This is just like TF2, except the developers of Unturned have no idea why botting of this level is still happening, years after the game's timed item drops were disabled. Some suspect that people artificially inflate the player count to make the game seem more popular than it actually is, but in reality, it's just people exploiting the free nature of the game. And, generally speaking, if a game is live service, is free to play, and has some incentive to rank up accounts or offer some type of free currency, it's almost guaranteed to be botted for profit. Here's another example, Lost Ark. It's been well known for years that this game is massively botted. Hundreds of thousands of bots are set up to collect gold, the in-game currency. And sure enough, we see similar behavior in this player data. Flattened player cycles, tons of random spikes and drops, just like TF2. Here's another example. This random game popped up in Steam's top 100 about a month into writing this script. Governor of Poker 3. Yeah, for years, this shitty poker game was dead. No one touched it. And then, all of a sudden, whoop, thousands of players, but perfectly flat player curves. Plus, huge spikes and drops. I'm seeing some sad souls in these reviews, but then, oh look! Sure enough, we have another heavily botted game for the sake of turning a profit. So heavily, in fact, that you can't even see the daily player fluctuations. This shit's flatter than a week-old soda. In general, this is what botting activity looks like. Flattened player cycles, massive random spikes and dips in the data. So, alongside this, thus far, I've shown what I believe to be pretty solid evidence for high volumes of continuous botting activity. Tens of thousands of accounts that remain online all the time, artificially inflating the player numbers. A good chunk of TF2's player count, as reported by Steam, is just bots farming items for profit. This was all deduced by simply looking at the raw data from Steam and then comparing it with other games. And now, for the million-dollar question. How many bots are there? How many humans are playing TF2 at any given time? And for that answer, we need some math. Here is a wonderful website, teamwork.tf. This website also tracks player numbers, but it processes the data from Steam's API a little bit differently. Instead of showing all online players, teamwork.tf reports a snapshot of the number of players inside of game servers. This is greatly beneficial because this opens up an entirely new type of analysis few other games have. But before that, something I should note, because I know for a fact people are going to bitch at me for referencing these data. There's nothing shady about about Teamwork.tf's numbers, as I've seen many others insinuate before. They simply add up all of the accounts inside of game servers, data that's directly accessible through Steam's API and the game itself. These data are trustworthy and are reasonably accurate. That aside, what's useful about Teamwork's player counts is that it excludes all of the accounts on the main menu, or in queue for a game. Ergo, it filters out nearly all idle and trade bots, at the cost of omitting some humans as well. However, these data also include cheater bots and idle bots inside of game servers, since these cannot be parsed from humans. Teamwork.tf's data is not showing 100% human activity, but it's definitely mostly human, and that's evident by simply looking at the data itself. We can see very strong daily player cycles, no weird spikes or dips either. At first glance, this looks like data from any other healthy video game. And thankfully, unlike Steam, we can look at historic data from Teamwork.tf. Here, the data are sampled hourly, but only from the last couple of weeks. Thankfully, however, some unsung hero has been saving daily snapshots of this webpage on the Wayback Machine, something you cannot do with Steam or SteamDB. So, spent a couple of days, and I scraped all the data, as much of a bitch it was, and check this shit out. What we have here is an over 3-year-long, high-resolution, historic record of the number of players inside of TF2 game servers, from late 2020 to present day. This is the first time in TF2's history that we've seen such a complete record of player numbers. So let's dig in. Let's compare Teamwork.tf's data to the data that I've been collecting from Steam. To keep things simple, let's just take about a week's worth of data to start. I'll plot them on the same chart. And the first thing you'll notice is a massive discrepancy. Teamwork.tf has far lower player counts than Steam. It's anywhere from 25% of Steam's values to oftentimes way less, and only half of that 25% resides in Valve servers, which is a very interesting observation, one that confirmed some suspicions of my own. Such a low volume of human players explains the long queue times during anything other than peak player hours. If we really had 70,000 people playing most of the time, queue times, even during off hours, wouldn't be atrocious for anything other than the 5 most popular maps. Additionally, such a low volume of players inside of Valve servers explains why we feel such a low volume of cheater bots. If we really had 70,000 humans playing TF2, 1,000 cheater bots wouldn't amount to much. But with only 5 to 10,000 humans inside of Valve servers, that explains why so few cheater bots are way more tangible. Because that means, on average, inside of Valve servers, 1 out of every 8 players is a fucking bot. But are bots alone what causes this massive discrepancy? Devil's Advocate says, hey, this could be mostly humans excluded by Teamwork.tf. And yes, Teamwork.tf excludes players not inside of game servers. So, people in queue for a game, or messing around in their backpack, or opening cases, gawking at Fempyro, what have you, they don't show up. But we should not expect for the number of people not playing the game to be that much greater, let alone 3 times greater than those playing the game. If that were true, something is wrong. The matchmaking system is broken, the servers are down, something. Not to mention, about 40 to 60% of server activity takes place inside of community servers, where players tend to stay put for longer periods of time. This would not translate to 3 out of 4 players waiting outside of game servers. Additionally, even if these were all humans outside of game servers, they should also go to bed, just the same as any other human. So why does it seem like they never log off? As a very basic observation, Steam's player numbers look almost exactly like Teamwork's numbers, just noisier with all of those spikes, and shifted upwards by a good amount. Again, this would happen due to a bunch of accounts that never go offline, raising the minimum baseline of online accounts. So, is this discrepancy human? No. Mostly not. This discrepancy occurs because, again, Teamwork.tf excludes some humans, but also all of the idling and trade bots that stay online all the time. And now, to address the million-dollar question, how many bots are there? What is Team Fortress 2's real human player count? Now bear with me, I'll take y'all through this nice and slow. Math can be scary, but I'll be your guide. I'm sure y'all's first instinct is to simply take the difference between the peak player counts, and that difference would be all the bots. You shift the player curves back down, and then you're done. This wouldn't be accurate. On average, Teamwork's player cycles are about 8,000 players strong, whereas Steam's cycles are about 18,000 players strong. We already know that player cycles are mostly, if not entirely, human, because remember, people gotta sleep. So given that difference, it seems like 10,000 humans aren't accounted for in Teamwork.tf's daily player fluctuations. Ergo, a direct shift of values would not be appropriate, nor accurate. However, what we can do is compare percentages. For example, let's take a look at Dota, PUBG, Rust, and Apex Legends. If I take the player data and then split it up by day, if I then take the difference between the maximum player count and the minimum player count on each day, we get the average size of that game's daily player flux. But then, if I divide the size of that player flux by the maximum daily player counts, this returns the percentage of the total player count that is represented in that day's fluctuation. For instance, Apex Legends. The size of its player cycles represents about 75% of its maximum player counts. PUBG, about 82%. Dota, 57%. Rust, 50%. And what's fascinating is that this percentage is robustly consistent, varying very slightly, regardless of the time of year, regardless of game updates, etc. This holds true even after major game updates, where the volume of players changes drastically. For example, Apex Legends saw a massive update back in February, doubling the player count, but the size of its player cycles still represents about 75% of the peak player counts. And this makes sense. You should expect for the proportion of daily activity to scale with the volume of humans engaging with your game. Adding or removing players would not change the proportion of people that fall into general sleeping patterns. And we are extremely fortunate to have Teamwork.tf's player numbers. Again, those player counts are mostly human, so we can use Teamwork.tf's player cycles as a tool to estimate TF2's true player count. Let's take a look at a more recent week's worth of data. Teamwork.tf's player fluctuations represent about 50% of its daily peak player counts. We should expect for this value to be the same if we look at Steam's player cycles. Again, the size of player cycles should scale up with an increasing volume of humans. So, if we lump all of the humans on the main menu or trading what have you with the humans inside of game servers, that percentage should remain at around 50%. But it doesn't. Steam's fluctuations represent a mere 16% of its total player counts. This reinforces that Steam's numbers are massively inflated by a bunch of accounts that never go offline, again, raising that minimum baseline of online accounts, shifting that player curve upwards. So how far do I need to shift Steam's numbers down to reach that figure of 50%? About 48,000 accounts need to go away. So that tells me, right now, about 70% of Steam's reported player count is bots. This is a conservative estimate, given that I can't reliably account for bots inside of game servers. And the trickiest part about this process is that you can't get an exact number of bots at any time. That's impossible. An educated but ballpark estimate is the best we can do. Mastercoms, the source code wizard that I'm sure some of y'all are familiar with, wrote a tool that apparently detects botting activity. They've only ever given one public estimate of about 20 to 30,000 bots from this tool from a couple years ago, but this appears to only capture known bot and cheater accounts. So, it's an incomplete estimate. Additionally, the ratio of bots to humans changes throughout the year, from day to day even, as botnets of various sizes come and go. For example, if I go back to say the first week of February, Teamwork.tf's player cycles are still pretty much the same, still representing 50% of the daily peaks. But Steam's data is very different. Here, Steam's player counts are much higher, with the daily player cycles now representing only 12% of the daily peaks. In this case, I need to knock off about 70,000 accounts in order for it to reach that 50%. During this week, about 80% of Steam's player count was bots. In general, as a very generous estimate in favor of players, TF2's true player count likely hovers around 25 to 30,000 humans on any given day. This is still pretty good for a now almost 17-year-old game, but that player count reported by Steam is mostly bots. And if this doesn't concern you as a TF2 fan, if I have yet to convince you that TF2 is heavily botted, I'm sorry, and I really am saying this with a heavy heart because it makes me sad as well. But it's about to get worse. A lot worse. December 21st, 2023. TF2's player count was around 69,000 players. Less than 36 hours later, the player count triples to nearly 216,000. 2 weeks after the Smith update launched. There was a patch on this day, but I seriously doubt increasing the size of the frog on carrier brought out 147,000 new players. Devil's Advocate says this could be a bunch of people being let off for the holidays, but no other games see a proportional spike in players at this time, which is what you would expect if this was the case. Well, the devil now says, well, you just got a bunch of people coming online to unbox the new case after the update came out. That would be believable if it wasn't 2 weeks after the update launched. And then, January 7th, 2024, 50,000 accounts go offline in mere minutes. The same day when the Smith update ended, the same hour the update ended. You honestly can't expect me to believe that more than 1/3 of all reported players at the time suddenly decided to log off all at once. No Steam outages, no server issues, no vac waves, just gone. What you're looking at are massive botnets firing up during the Smith update, specifically to harvest the new item cases, and, as I mentioned earlier, gift-a-pult drops during their most popular time window of use. Huge chunks of bots sporadically disappear, about 40,000 bots right here for example, and then, finally, when the Smith update ends, the remaining 50,000 all go offline. There's no sense in running these bots anymore if players aren't logging on, getting their stockings, and then using the gift-a-pult to send a gift. I also doubt this was someone at Valve banning the accounts, because they can't even properly implement a hat or a map these days. Not to mention, as discussed earlier, they tend to ban these bot farms before the updates come out, so they can't exploit the free items. And you know what? It makes sense to run bot farms of this magnitude. You collect and sell cases when they're more popular, and if your bots make up more than 2/3 of all players, you're getting more than 2/3 of all gift-a-pult drops, because they're delivered to any random online account. You don't need to be inside of game servers. Oh, what? Not good enough for you? Alright, let's compare Steam's data to Teamwork.tf's data during the Smith 2023 update. If that spike of 216,000 players on December 21st was comprised of at least some human activity, we should see some spike in players inside of game servers and enjoying the new content, right? Nope. Throughout the entire month of December, from the launch of the Smith update to its final day, player behavior is stagnant. No increase when all those accounts come online on the 21st, and no decrease when they all drop offline on the 7th. Hell, we don't even see much of a bump in players when the update launches. It didn't even surpass the normal player numbers that happen over a weekend. That's pretty fucking sad. And to back this up, Mastercoms raised an alarm about gift-a-pult harvesters as well, 5 days after those 147,000 accounts came online. They saw the exact same behavior. No appreciable spike in players, only in botting activity. And that's the nail in the coffin. Not only was the Smithmas 2023 update massively botted, but that player peak of 216,000 players wasn't even close to being real. I'm sorry, but how in the hell am I supposed to believe any player peaks anymore? I simply used to take these at face value and think to myself, wow, the game's doing really well. But now that I've seen botting activity of this magnitude during a lackluster Smithmas update, are any previous spikes in players real? Was the all-time player peak of 254,000 players even close to being real? No, I don't think so. And sadly, I can't get high-resolution data from Steam around the time of previous major updates. I've only been recording myself since December, but thankfully I have other pieces of useful information. The one thing I could find from around the summer update was this screenshot of a Game Journal article of that high-resolution data. I can roughly estimate the time during the update by drawing a bar that represents a day, and then using that as a ruler. This right here is a daily cycle, so I can use that as my reference. If I look at the initial jump in players, the player count almost instantly doubles. It looks like about 75,000 players log on over the course of 3 hours. That's suspicious, but could easily be hand-waved away as the initial jump in players logging on for the hype. Fine. But then, about 10 hours later, a patch releases, seemingly knocking those same 75,000 accounts offline. Oddly familiar to Maintenance Day. We have a couple of hours of otherwise normal activity, so to speak, and then suddenly, 100,000 accounts snap back online. Yeah, fuck me if that doesn't look like botting activity, where botnets got rapidly turned back on after that patch came out. But I can go even further. I can compare the player data from Teamwork.tf with the downsampled data that we do have from Steam. Sadly, Teamwork.tf has a lot of missing data around this time, but with the data we do have, we do see a bump in players after the update comes out. But hilariously, and somewhat depressingly, player counts aren't that different than what we see during previous year's updates of any kind. Not to mention, the number of players reported inside of game servers isn't even remotely similar in magnitude to what we see in Steam's data. No more than 10% of what's being reported during that initial jump in players. And just like the Smithmas update, when all of those players drop offline from Steam, we see none of that reflected inside of server activity. Player counts do remain slightly elevated during this time, but they're entirely stagnant. So that tells me none of the activity reported by Steam was human. Otherwise, it would have been reflected, even somewhat reflected, inside of the human activity we see inside of game servers. I think I can firmly conclude that the summer update was massively botted. That player peak of 254,000 players wasn't even close to being real. And what about previous updates? Summer 2021? Same story. Huge spikes in players on Steam, but a very slight uptick in humans inside of game servers. About the same amount we saw in 2023. Summer 2022? Even worse. 0 uptick in human activity. Smithmas 2021. Another massive spike on Steam, but the number of players in game servers doesn't even break what's normally seen on a weekend. Smithmas 2022, another massive spike on Steam, but absolutely no change in the number of players inside of game servers. Scream Fortress. Well, generally, we do see a very slight uptick in the number of players in servers. Humans are more incentivized to play at this time because of contracts and rewards. But just like Summer 2023, the spike in players on Steam was insane, peaking at just over 200,000 players, but almost 0 noticeable spike was seen in the players inside of game servers. Given that almost 0 human activity is reflected inside of game servers during every single update, I think I can, at the very least, pose the possibility that pretty much every major update for TF2 is botted to high hell. And one final thing to note. If I look at the entire record from Teamwork.tf, over the last 3 years, player numbers have been stable. No tangible growth, but no tangible decline either. Whereas on Steam, we see continued, steady growth since 2018. If this were truly the case, shouldn't we expect to see that growth reflected in server activity? We don't. So this suggests, at least for me, that much of TF2's growth after Jungle Inferno has been driven by increasing bot activity, not new players, as Valve gradually started giving less of a shit as the years went by. They don't ban idle bots anymore, let alone any cheater bots, resulting in heavily inflated player numbers. Seems like that's been the case for many years now, heavily implying that roughly the same amount of people have been playing TF2 for the greater part of the past decade, about 25 to 30,000 people. While I may not have direct confirmation from the mouths of bot hosters as to how many bots are running at one time, I have presented strong evidence that TF2 is heavily botted. We have evidence in TF2's own player counts, evidence from traders that botnets exist and operate at huge scales, word from Valve that they've dealt with huge botnets in the past,
Bots, slow
correlation of identical behavior in other video games that are well known to be botted, evidence from that massive discrepancy between Steam and the mostly human player activity inside of game servers, and the clear as day evidence that pretty much every major update over the last 3 years has been massively botted. I can firmly conclude that a large majority of TF2's player count, as reported by Steam, at any time are bots, mostly idlers. We cannot trust any player numbers, let alone player peaks, being reported by Steam. That's the main takeaway from this video. Not an exact number of bots in TF2, again, that's impossible, but rather the observation that about 70 to 80% of TF2's player count, as reported by Steam, is not human. Thing is, we only feel about 3% of those bots, the cheaters. Idlers don't impact the gameplay experience, unless you're involved in TF2's relatively small microeconomy. But another major takeaway from this video is that my work here shows how that 3% of bots can cripple the game. With so few real players inside of Valve servers, it really doesn't take much to cause a headache. Alright, let's exhale for a moment here. This has been a long video with a lot of information to process that I guarantee isn't making people feel very good. You're not meant to feel good after this video, you're meant to be informed. And not really sure how to close this out, but it wouldn't be a video on my channel if I didn't give some thoughts of my own, so I'll do that now. From my point of view, a lack of growth makes perfect sense for TF2. I've been playing TF2 since launch. I've seen every single thing that this game has been through. Why on earth would anyone have expected for TF2 to grow after 2018? In 2016, TF2 left its worst update behind itself, Meet Your Match, which alienated countless players thanks to the horrific matchmaking system, and of course all the other changes Valve made with zero thought. Didn't even ask us, didn't even test anything. Well, they did the beta, but that was basically nothing. And then, whoop, there you go, they dumped that in our laps, and that was it. In the 2 years following, players were begging, praying for some kind of a change, a rollback, something, to make that dumpster fire of an update just a little bit more bearable. We thought that was gonna come in 2017 when Jungle Inferno came around. Players came back in droves for that update. But once everyone realized that the game was going to stay as is, players left in droves. Entering 2019, TF2 saw its lowest player counts since the game went free to play. And then in the following years, TF2 was completely abandoned, gradually flooded by bots and cheaters, anti-consumer practices punishing free-to-plays, which Valve absolutely profits from, mediocre at best to terrible at worst content, assuming it functioned. Sure, TF2 is free, TF2 is fun, but when you have all of this going against it, and the fact that it's unplayable for half the day, more than half the day, why in the hell would we expect for players, let alone new players, to stick around and then make the game grow? It makes no sense. You see, that to me reinforces the validity behind TF2's true player count being far, far smaller than what we see on Steam. And if I dare maybe is so bold as to be even more candid, what's interesting, at least for me, is that for anyone who doesn't play TF2, the game looks totally fine. The vocal spheres surrounding TF2 are very misleading. I'm not saying they're doing this intentionally, it's simply the nature of people being able to ignore or edit out all of the bad TF2 experiences. So, we have massive YouTube channels making videos with millions of views, countless viral posts and art and memes, what have you, that make it seem as if though Team Fortress 2 is this flourishing game where everything is totally fine. Team Fortress 2, the game everyone loves talking about, but as I've shown, not that many people play. So as a result, we have this overly positive, oftentimes toxically positive, misleading picture painted by the discourse surrounding TF2. It's basically taboo to say anything remotely negative about this game. You can't even call an objectively terrible weapon skin stinky without a bigger figure strong-arming their way into the discourse and trying to shut you down. I don't know what causes this. Perhaps immense peer pressure to remain positive all the time because it's good for your brand, or ignorance is bliss, I don't know. But no one talks about the bots. No one makes videos about the bots. If you only watch TF2 YouTube videos, or God forbid, consume TF2 Twitter and Reddit, and didn't play the game, you'd have no idea how bad things really are. It's almost an afterthought, like the bots aren't even here. And for some reason, it's frowned upon to talk about the bots. If you address the problem, people either dismiss you outright or get mad at you. They tell you to stop being negative or nothing will change, so just shut up about it. If any other game were flooded by bots and cheaters rendering it unplayable, CS2, Apex Legends, pick any other popular game, there would be fucking riots. In fact, that's happening right now with CS2. Valve is royally fucking their biggest moneymaker aside from Steam, and people are fed up. And yet for some reason, TF2 fans are just complacent. They keep giving Valve money and praising this game despite their game being unplayable for half the day, praising every little thing that comes their way regardless of quality or care. There is no solution to this problem or any other problem other than to speak up about it. Because as consumers, that's all we can do. That's what I've been doing on my channel for years now in regards to this game. And that's why I made this video. I believe it's important for everyone to understand the reality of TF2's situation, because no one says it. So I'll state it plainly. The reality is that TF2, the game, is not thriving. It's up shit's creek, and has been for many years now. TF2 faces abhorrent neglect, resulting in a plague of cheaters and bots, for which Valve absolutely keeps track of and has the resources to address. But thus far, they've willingly chosen not to. I strongly doubt they can't combat publicly available cheats that you can download after a simple Google search. I seriously doubt they can't take some kind of action. The multi-billion-dollar company can't handle a few guys in their basement. Oh well, sorry guys, we're stretched too thin right now, so have another hat box. That's just pathetic. There is no excuse for this. And if anyone dares to utter the phrase treadmill work, fuck off, because 90% of the jobs in the world are treadmill work. It's Valve's responsibility to maintain this game, so long as it's being offered as playable with incentivized microtransactions. Yet they consistently fail to meet their responsibilities, despite TF2 earning them tens of millions of dollars a year. Millions earned by simply copying and pasting oftentimes mediocre content they don't even make. Content they don't even ensure is functional, which in tandem with bots results in consistently buggy, broken, and unplayable updates. That's been the status quo for almost 8 years. The one-time concert event that amounted to a self-congratulatory circle jerk praising how much we love TF2 isn't going to do anything. Save TF2 was like trying to tell the fire department that your house is burning down by screaming how much you love your house, instead of telling them, hey, my house is burning down. And even though I know for a fact Valve will continue to do nothing, here's the right way to handle this. Consistently and directly address the problem. Tell Valve, email them, tweet at them, make a video, something, speak. TF2 is full of bots. We cannot play it. Fix your fucking game, or I'm not your customer anymore. I know that from this point forward, I'm not spending a dime on this game or any other Valve game until something changes. And if anyone watching this seriously wants Valve to do something, I suggest you all do the same. By spending money on TF2, you're telling Valve that this is acceptable, and financially incentivizing them to keep things as they are. Speak with your mouths and with your wallets. I can't reinforce that enough on this channel. I love this game, and I want nothing more than for it to thrive, but Valve has shown zero interest in addressing TF2's biggest problems. But they will happily keep taking our money, and that is some 100% grade A horseshit.
Well, this sucks.